All right, let's talk about a molecule that, well, everyone knows, nicotine. For most of us, it's the ultimate villain in the tobacco story. But what if I told you there might be another side to this story? A heroic side. Today, we're going to explore the strange double life of this incredibly powerful chemical.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Is nicotine always the bad guy? For decades, the answer felt like a definite yes. But, science is starting to paint a much more complicated picture. We're going to dive into the surprising dual roles of this molecule, from its infamous power to get us hooked to its wild potential as a medicine.
And our whole journey starts with a puzzle, a real head-scratcher that popped up in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers were combing through hospital data and they noticed something that just didn't make any sense, something that seemed to go against everything we thought we knew about smoking.
And Dr. Farsalinos really nails it here. It was a total paradox. Common sense tells you that smoking would make a respiratory infection worse, right? But the early numbers from China were showing the exact opposite. Now, let's be crystal clear. Nobody was saying smoking is good for you. But it got scientists asking new questions about one specific part of tobacco, the nicotine itself.
This is the number that really kicked things off, 6.5%. So get this, in China, about half of all men smoke. It's a huge number. Yet in one of the first big studies of hospitalized COVID patients, only 6.5% of them were smokers. That gap was so big, researchers knew they had to figure out what was going on at a biological level.
So to understand this paradox, and really to understand nicotine at all, we've got to zoom way in, down to the cellular level. Because it turns out our bodies are already built to interact with nicotine. This isn't a story about some foreign chemical invading our system. It's about a molecule that fits perfectly into our body's own ancient hardware.
Let's meet the main characters here, nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, or NACHRs for short. The easiest way to think of them is like tiny little locks sitting on the surface of our cells. And nicotine, well, it acts like a master key that can pop open these locks. But what's fascinating is these locks weren't made for nicotine. They're a fundamental part of our own biology, designed for our own chemicals.
Okay, and this is where we have to bust a huge myth. When you hear nicotine, you immediately think brain, right? Addiction, focus, all that stuff. But these NACR locks, they are located all over your body, doing all sorts of jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with what we normally think of.
Look at this. Yeah, they're on our brain cells for sure, but they're also on our heart cells. They're on the nerves that control taste and smell. And here's the kicker for our story, they are all over our immune cells. We're talking T cells, B cells, macrophages, the frontline soldiers of our body's defense system.
So what happens when that nicotine key turns the lock on one of our immune cells? This is where the story gets really interesting. Instead of causing a problem, sometimes nicotine can act like an unlikely firefighter, showing up to calm down a dangerous fire. It does this by flipping on a switch for something called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. Now that's a mouthful, but it's basically the body's own internal off switch for inflammation. It's a natural system we all have that's designed to stop our immune system from going totally haywire and attacking our own body.
So here's how it works. Nicotine fits perfectly into a specific type of lock called the alpha-7 NACHR, which is super common on immune cells. When it binds, it's like sending a text message into the cell that says, "Hey, cool it." The cell then dials way down on its production of these inflammatory proteins. And just like that, the fire starts to die down.
And this isn't just a theory, They've seen this in action. In one lab study, they basically mimicked a severe infection in healthy people, and ones who were wearing nicotine patches actually showed less short-term inflammatory signaling. It's a clear-cut example of nicotine telling an overactive immune system to just stand down.
All right, so if it can do all this good stuff, if it can act like an anti-inflammatory, then why is it also one of the most addictive substances on the entire planet? The answer is simple and complicated at the same time. It's a master key that fits more than one lock.
Let's completely switch gears now and look at a totally different part of the body, the brain's reward system. Because in here, nicotine doesn't act like a firefighter. Oh no. In here, it acts like an accelerator pedal that's been slammed to the floor. See, the whole effect of nicotine, and I mean all of it, comes down to which lock, which receptor subtype it binds to. For that anti-inflammatory effect we just talked about, the important lock is the alpha-7 subtype. But for addiction, that's a whole different story, driven by a different lock, the alpha-4 beta-2 subtype.
And here's the crucial thing you have to understand. This alpha-4 beta-2 receptor is the most common nicotinic receptor in the human brain. It's perfectly positioned to be the primary engine of nicotine's insane addictive power. Its location, its function, it's all perfectly tailored to get you hooked. So when nicotine locks into these specific receptors, it basically turbocharges the neurons responsible for dopamine. That gives you a huge surge of that feel-good chemical right in your brain's reward center. And your brain, which is a learning machine, very quickly figures out, hey, nicotine equals feeling good. And that creates this powerful, reinforcing loop that is just incredibly hard to break.
So what we have are two completely different stories about the exact same molecule. In one story, nicotine is a potential anti-inflammatory hero. In the other, it's a super addictive villain. The molecule itself isn't good or bad, its effect depends entirely on where in the body it's acting. It's all about context.
And this table just lays it all out, plain and simple. It really captures that central conflict. The key hits the alpha-7 receptors on immune cells, and it suppresses inflammation. But when that same key hits the alpha-4 beta-2 receptors in the brain, it drives addiction. Two different locks, two dramatically different outcomes.
So the huge takeaway here is that nicotine is this incredibly potent molecule, but its effects are completely dependent on the context. Its potential to fight inflammation is a story that's totally separate from its role as an addictive substance, especially when delivered through really harmful ways like smoking.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely fascinating question for the future of medicine. Now that we understand there are different locks, could we design a brand new key? A molecule that's smart enough to only target the alpha-7 receptors to fight inflammation while completely ignoring the alpha-4 beta-2 receptors that drive addiction? Could we finally, actually, isolate the hero from the villain?